So, because I'm using the DJI goggles a lot, I've ordered one of the URUAV sort of adapters for the DJI goggles to make them analog. But they're out of stock at the moment and I don't know when they're going to come in, and that just seemed like a really easy way to add an analog receiver onto my DJI goggles and thus remove the need whatsoever, now that the latency doesn't exist following the latest patch. Remove the need for any other goggles and then I can get rid of them. And I was kind of looking at this and thinking, oh, actually I wonder if I can do something with it. So you've joined me and I've basically just taken out the 4 M2 hex screws out the bottom of this docking, which basically reveals the inner workings, and it basically just lifts out. And if you're familiar with docking, it's a ridiculously over-engineered thing. So we've got all this kind of stuff here. We've got a sort of connector here that we don't need. We've got LEDs and all sorts of sort of jazz going on in here. So a lot of these connectors don't really do anything that we would want in a simple module. So one of these connectors, this one, is for the LEDs on the front, and the other one is presumably for this sort of menu switch, which, bearing in mind I won't be using the Furious FPV module, we can kind of do without. And the good thing about this, guys, it takes up to 4S, which the DJI goggles do also. And I was kind of wondering if this would be a nice simple solution, bearing in mind it's got the magic power switch. And the rest of it, I mean, we don't really sort of need half of this stuff. So being lazy as I am, I'm just going to snip this bit of plastic off here rather than desoldering it. I can always reuse this again. It's just going to have a little hole in it. So that frees this little unit inside, and as you can see, we've saved a huge amount of room just by getting rid of the magnetic bit in the bottom and the sort of fancy bits on the front, which leaves us with this little unit, which comes with this little plate which sits over the top, and then you get your module. This is a Furious Achilles module. Obviously I'll use it with Rapidfire, which I have, but it just sort of sits in there quite nicely, which is great. But it would be even better if half of this jazz wasn't on the back of it. So what have we got? So we've got 2 ports for HDMI and DVR here, which we don't need. And we have 2 AV out ports, which we do need, or we need one of them. And then we've got the DC input, and this guy is obviously connected separately, and then we've got a little capacitor and obviously this big silly connector, which, how does that go on there? Oh, okay. I thought these were kind of screws, but whatever they are, they're made out of exceedingly soft plastic. Yeah, so we've got some pins in here, as you can see, are on the bottom there. So all I'm going to do is just gently kind of ease these out. In fact, let me switch on my soldering iron. And what I should do is really desolder this. But bugger that for a game of Smarties. People work under the impression that FPV is a finicky business, which it can be, but it doesn't have to be. Sometimes you can just use a bit of brute force. And the key to this is, as long as you don't damage the traces and cause a short, you're laughing. So suddenly we have a much slimmer board. So that guy can go. As can that guy. So presumably, if we were now to plug it in, we would probably, or should have, power. And in my box of tricks I have this handy little connector, which should give us power. Which it does. So if I get this guy and line it up, and plug it in, switch this back on again, let's watch Ross blow himself up. There we go. I have a module, which has saved me from waiting ages for the connector. Happy days. And it takes 4S, which makes my life very easy, because all I can do, and I've even got an on-off switch, even better. So all I need to do is basically take the DJI power lead and splice another barrel connector onto it, and Bob is your uncle. Plug the AV lead into the goggles and then do the same with that. Obviously I'm going to have to shorten all these wires. Plug this guy back in again. So that's plugged in and that's plugged in. Just need to plug in my goggles. Right, so we're in AV mode. And then if I get an analog quad, we have liftoff. Can you see that? Where's the bloody... So we're good. And then so I'm wiggling my quad around zero latency that I can see. Image looks a lot better than it did do actually when it first came out. So all is well in the world. Right, so here's my Rapidfire module, and there's its case. It's a horribly made thing, the Rapidfire. I know nobody raves about it, but it's really, everything about it is flimsy, including the way that this case is kind of like holds itself on. It just falls around, or at least mine is. Let's just get this out of here. And stick the Rapidfire in. So there's Rapidfire. Which of course the case doesn't fit very well. Bearing in mind these things are all made for 5.5p, I wonder if this one will fit in. This is the other case actually, that one might work better. Oh! That's not actually that bad. Or I could use this, which is basically just the docking that I quickly printed out. So the docking Rapidfire, which I quickly printed out, which doesn't exactly fit particularly well. Bit of glue, be good as new. Temptation's got the better of me. Right, what I'm going to do is a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do actually, while I'm thinking, get some conformal coating on this board, because if I don't, I'm kind of asking for trouble. I'm not going to do it with any great finesse, just slap it on. Because what I do know from furious FPV stuff is quality. It ain't. Right, so that's that side done. I'm not trying to completely sort of isolate or waterproof it. I'm basically just giving it a little bit of protection. Nothing more than that. I'm not going to dunk it in a vat of water, but if I get caught out in the rain and a bit gets on my goggles before I can get under cover, then this will just save my bacon a little bit. Don't know what this is actually, by the way. Just sort of merrily slapping conformal coating over it. I don't suppose it really makes any difference. Right, so that is that. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm pretty happy actually with what I've found. It's sort of got rid of a lot of weight and size of all the things that I don't want, and left the bit that I do want, which is the 4S regulator, and obviously the connections for the goggles. Right, I'm continuing my messing around. Basically what I've done is just removed this capacitor and replaced it with 2 wires because it was kind of sticking out a long way and I wanted it to be more flush. And on the other side I bravely chopped off the kind of pin connector that this, can you see, that this would have slid into. And the reason why I've done that is you ended up with the sort of module sticking out way farther than I would like. So all I've been basically doing is getting hold of one side with some wire cutters and then basically just applying a bit of heat with my soldering iron to the through holes on the other side, which has allowed me to hopefully get most of these connectors off without damaging anything too badly. And I did this off camera because A, it's quite finicky, and B, I kind of presumed I would screw it up. Right, so we've now got that, and we have this. So what we're going to do with this Rapidfire is just take the pins off it and hope I don't break it. Most of these things tend to be made for about 3p, so they generally don't need a lot of force to get them off, as you can see. Yeah, so that came off nice and easy. Just snip away that last little bit. And there we have an exposed unit, which means, and the reason I'm being so blasé about this is because I have no plans to ever use this guy again. So now we can basically just attach this guy like so, which means it isn't 40,000 degrees away from where I want it. Right, I think I've come up with a solution that I like. If you remember, docking comes with this plastic plate, which obviously sat on the other side of that, and all I've basically done is just cut out a bit of an outline, and I'll move these wires of course, but essentially that can just sit back on there, and because it has little screws which go into there, it makes kind of a nice secure base for this guy. And obviously I'll have to reroute these wires and possibly bring them through, but it means that I can then put the put the Rapidfire unit in and sort of use the original 3D printed mount that I had, and it'll just clip inside. Right, I'm coming back to this after a day actually, because I haven't had the time to play with it, and as I haven't had the time to play with it, every time I've sort of come into the garage to grab something, I've just slapped another coat of conformal coating on the back of this board and a little bit extra on the front of it as well, just to really protect these components. And I think I know where I'm going now. Right, I've got my wires through and I've just basically put some tape around them so I know which one is which. And basically, as I said, I want to sort of press this and fit it to this unit, and then use a couple of these screws to attach it via the existing holes here. But obviously I need to attach it elsewhere as well, and also protect some of these components inside. So I just found in my drawer some of this sort of thicker foam tape. So what I'm going to do is just apply some of this into sort of key areas, such as there. In fact, I'll use a double layer. Like so. And I'm going to do the same down the sides. And I'm just going to put a bit there and a bit on the other side of that. And again, double it up for a bit of padding. This should do the job. And then these screws are a little bit, or quite a bit, longer than I actually need, but they will do for lining this guy up. Get that in. I'm not going to leave them like this, I'm just getting them in temporarily. And I'll do the same with this one. So what I want really is just a couple of black or whatever colour. Oh, actually that might do. I'm just going to stick one of these under here. So that kind of holds that. So there we have it. I've added on my 3D printed Rapidfire case, which I'll link in the description below. It just sits in the original sort of plastic part, and I've just reinforced these connections with a bit of hot glue, and I've got my on-off switch there, which is going to be really handy when I'm using these with the DJI goggles. In terms of connecting it, I've essentially just put some Velcro and a couple of rubber pads, and that just allows it to nicely, if I find the right way, to basically just nicely mount on the DJI goggles like so, and it's not going to go anywhere. I can do it both ways depending on which works out better. And I can also do it on my SkyZone goggles like so. And again, if I'm in a really tricky area, or perhaps I suddenly have a dying urge to use Rapidfire, bish bash bosh, it's done. Speaking of SkyZone, they're bringing out a module bay for their for the Rapidfires. So this is just really me playing. In terms of the cable, I've found an old barrel cable with a connection like this on the bottom, which I'm just going to utilize with this part to give me power. On the other side, I've stripped the head off and exposed the positive and negative wires, and then all I've done is take two of these barrel connectors, splice them together, and then all I'm going to do is basically wire this, reinforce it as much as I can, and then I will have two connectors on the end, one for the Rapidfire, and another for whatever goggles I'm using. And if needs be, I've also got a balance connector for the fan, although obviously I can only use a 2S battery if I'm going to be using that, but it's just there if I need it for anything else. So all I'm going to do now is, as I said, connect this to the other side of the wire. Ideally, I wish I had some liquid electrical tape to sort of make these as strong as I possibly can, but I haven't, so I'm just going to have to reinforce it with conformal coating and possibly a little bit of glue, and then masking tape, and then heat shrink over the top.